It was not empty and desolate as he had anticipated. In the middle of the open space was an immense boulder around which many wild beasts had gathered. Apparently they were holding a conclave of some sort. Near to the big rock he saw bears, so firmly and heavily built that they seemed like fur clad blocks of stone. They were lying down, and their little eyes blinked impatiently. It was obvious that they had come from their winter sleep to attend court, and that they could hardly keep awake. Behind them, in tight rows, were hundreds of wolves. They were not sleepy, for wolves are more alert in winter than in summer. They sat upon their haunches like dogs, whipping the ground with their tails and panting, their tongues lolling far out of their jaws. Behind the wolves the lynx skulked, stiff-legged and clumsy, like misshapen cats. They were loath to be among the other beasts, and hissed and spat when one came near them. The row back of the lynx was occupied by the wolverines, with dog faces and bear coats. They were not happy on the ground, and they stamped their pads impatiently, longing to get into the trees. Behind them, covering the entire space of the forest border, leaped the foxes, the weasels, and the martens. These were small and perfectly formed, but they looked even more savage and bloodthirsty than the larger beasts. All this the dean plainly saw, for the whole place was illuminated. Upon the huge rock at the centre was the wood nymph, who held in her hand a pine torch which burned in a big red flame. The nymph was as tall as the tallest tree in the forest. She wore a spruce brush mantle and had spruce cone hair. She stood very still, her face turned toward the forest. She was watching and listening. The dean saw everything as plain could be, but his astonishment was so great that he tried to combat it, and would not believe the evidence of his own eyes. "Such things cannot possibly happen," he thought. "I have ridden much too long in the bleak forest. This is only an optical illusion." Nevertheless, he gave the closest attention to the spectacle, and wondered what was about to be done. He hadn't long to wait before he caught the sound of a familiar bell, coming from the depths of the forest, and the next moment he heard footfalls and crackling of branches, as when many animals break through the forest. A big herd of cattle was climbing the mountain. They came through the forest in order in which they had marched to the mountain ranges. First came the bell cow, followed by the bull, then the other cows and the calves. The sheep, closely herded, followed. After them came the goats, and last were the horses and colts. The sheepdog trotted along beside the sheep, but neither shepherd nor shepherdess attended them. The dean thought it heart rending to see the tame animals coming straight toward the wild beasts. He would gladly have blocked their way and called "Halt!" but he understood that it was not within human power to stop the march of the cattle on this night. Therefore he made no move. The domestic animals were in a state of torment over that which they had to face. If it happened to be the bell cow's turn, she advanced with drooping head and faltering step. The goats had no desire either to play or to butt. The horses tried to bear up bravely, but their bodies were all of a quiver with fright. The most pathetic of all was the sheepdog. He kept his tail between his legs and crawled on the ground. The bell cow led the procession all the way up to the wood nymph, who stood on the boulder at the top of the mountain. The cow walked around the rock, and then turned toward the forest without any of the wild beasts touching her. In the same way all the cattle walked unmolested past the wild beasts. As the creatures filed past, the dean saw the wood nymph lower her pine torch over one and another of them. Every time this occurred, the beasts of prey broke into loud, exultant roars, particularly when it was lowered over a cow or some other large creature. The animal that saw the torch turning toward it uttered a piercing shriek, as if it had received a knife thrust in its flesh, while the entire herd to which it belonged bellowed their lamentations. Then the dean began to comprehend the meaning of what he saw. Surely he had heard that the animals in Delsbo assembled on Black's Ridge every New Year's Eve, that the wood nymph might mark out which among the tame beasts would that year be prey for the wild beasts. The dean pitied the poor creatures that were at the mercy of savage beasts, when in reality they should have no master but man. The leading herd had only just left when another bell tinkled, and the cattle from another farm tramped to the mountain top. These came in the same order as the first, and marched past the wood nymph, who stood there stern and solemn, indicating animal after animal for death. Herd upon herd followed, without a break in the line of procession. Some were so small that they included only one cow and a few sheep. Others consisted of only a pair of goats. It was apparent that these were from very humble homes, but they, too, were compelled to pass in review. The dean thought of the Delsbo farmers who had so much love for their beasts. Did they but know of it, surely they would not allow a repetition of this, he thought. They would risk their own lives rather than let their cattle wander amongst bears and wolves to be doomed by the wood nymph. The last herd to appear was the one from the rectory farm. The dean heard the sound of the familiar bell a long way off. The horse, too, must have heard it, for he began to shake in every limb and was bathed in sweat. "So it is your turn now to pass before the wood nymph to receive your sentence," the dean said to the horse. "Don't be afraid. Now I know why you brought me here, and I shall not leave you." The fine cattle from the parsonage farm emerged from the forest and marched to the wood nymph and the wild beasts. Last in the line was the horse that had brought his master to Black's Ridge. The dean did not leave the saddle, but let the animal take him to the wood nymph. He had neither knife nor gun for his defense, but he had taken out the prayer book and sat pressing it to his heart as he exposed himself to battle against evil. At first it appeared as if none had observed him. The dean's cattle filed past the wood nymph in the same order as the others had done. She did not wave the torch toward any of these, but as soon as the intelligent horse stepped forward, she made a movement to mark him for death. Instantly the dean held up the prayer book and the torchlight fell upon the cross on its cover. The wood nymph uttered a loud, shrill cry and let the torch drop from her hand. Immediately the flame was extinguished. In the sudden transition from light to darkness, the dean saw nothing, nor did he hear anything. About him reigned the profound stillness of a wilderness in winter. Then the dark clouds parted, and through the opening stepped the full round moon to shed its light upon the ground. The dean saw that he and the horse were alone on the summit of Black's Ridge. Not one of the many wild beasts was there. The ground had not been trampled by the herds that